All right, Dons, welcome to the lecture on Chapter 9, Section 4. Today we are going to talk about the war with Mexico, the impacts of the war with Mexico, and the beginning of westward migration in the United States of America. So our objectives today are summarize the conflicting attitudes on waging war with Mexico, why we should or should not wage war with them, describe the key battles that helped the United States win the war, and identify the territories that we gained.
So we're looking at this map, right, which kind of shows the expansion of the United States west, right? And we're focusing here on this area, Texas annexation, right, which we take in 1845, and then this is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo will give us all this in 1848, right? Remember, the border dispute 5440 or fight has been resolved, right? We have the line, Polk has done that part of his job, but he wants to add Texas or all of his blue land into the country.
And what's going to become an issue is Texas becomes this independent state after their revolution from Mexico, which Mr. Manelsky talked about in Chapter 9, Section 3. And then Texas will petition to annex itself to the United States. And they do, in fact, annex themselves to the United States. The problem is that the border of Texas is sort of in dispute. So there will be a disputed border between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And I'll just flip ahead to another, just so you can see it on this map. So all of this shaded region is disputed. Now, when Texas was just Texas, it wasn't that big of a deal that this area was in dispute because people had not really settled into this area yet, and Texas did not have the manpower or the money to go into another conflict with Mexico over this land. But when Texas is annexed into the United States, well, now Mexico doesn't have a border dispute with little old Texas. Now they have a border dispute with the United States of America.
Another thing to remember, if we're looking at this Texas map, 1820, Missouri Compromise, this Texas territory goes above the Missouri Compromise line. Yeah. Right? Again, that's territory that is supposed to be free, but again, Texas, remember, has slavery.
And you also have to keep in mind this is going to cause huge tension within the United States between the North and the South, because when the Missouri Compromise line was drawn right about here, none of this area belonged to the United States. So by gaining all of this land, you're basically voiding the compromise itself, because the compromise would have been totally different if that land was in the U.S. at the time in 1820.
So Polk, when he's elected, he wants to expand west, complete this manifest destiny. We're going to have Oregon. He settles that dispute. He gets Oregon and what would today be Washington State added to the country. And he also wants to add California, New Mexico, all that territory, kind of the far-flung reaches of Mexico, which would today be California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, and Nevada. He sends General Zachary Taylor to the Rio Grande River. Remember, that is the part of Texas that's under dispute. Okay, so there's a small skirmish outside off the Rio Grande at Matador, right? Mm-hmm. And Polk asked for a declaration of war against Mexico, claiming that Mexicans have killed Americans on American soil.
And this is really the sticking point to all of this. If we take a look at this map again, so you see the disputed territory right here. Well, all the way down here where the disputed territory meets the Mexico Pink territory, that's where the skirmish happened. So if we think about Polk's mindset at this time, he tries to negotiate, right, and he tries to buy New Mexico and California. And once Mexico rebuffs his negotiation attempt, says absolutely not, then he resorts to basically baiting Mexico into war with America. Like Mr. Manelsky said, Zachary Taylor and 4,000 men fight Mexican forces on the border of the Rio Grande, but that is in the disputed territory, almost in the country of Mexico. So from an American perspective, they have spilled blood on, quote, American soil, but from a Mexican perspective, they fought an invading United States Army into their land. And when Polk asked for a declaration of war from the House of Representatives, Abraham Lincoln, among other northern representatives, will stand up and basically accuse him of using propaganda and baiting Mexico into a war they shouldn't have ever had to fight. Charles Sumner from Massachusetts said that this debate should have been settled in the Senate, but now it will have to be settled in Mexico while losing the lives of Mexican soldiers. So we declare war, slavery becomes a huge issue, and the reason it becomes a huge issue is what we talked about earlier. If we take a look at the map of the United States, the Missouri Compromise line goes right through here, so all of this new territory is going to be south of that line. In theory, that means it's going to be slave territory. Of course, the Northerners recognize that and say, well, that's not fair. When we drew this line, this land did not exist.
Yeah, this war splits along sectional lines. The South is going to be the region of the country really pushing for war with Mexico so that they can expand slavery. We've talked about how slavery relies on expansion to keep itself profitable and keep itself going. So if we're not expanding, slavery is dying.
Exactly. And like I said, Northern representatives recognize this. David Wilmot, a Democrat, Northern Democrat, anti-slave Democrat from Pennsylvania, actually stood up and told President Polk, well, if you want us to fund this war, you have to promise there will be no African Americans in this territory, which is basically the equivalence of saying there will be no slavery in this territory. So the Northerners knew what Polk and the Southerners were trying to do, they just weren't able to stop them from doing it. So, the war itself, we will hit very briefly. We will not talk about the fighting in the Mexican-American War very much. One thing I will say is it was utter domination by the United States. 11 of the 12 battles were won convincingly by the U.S., even when we were outnumbered greatly. General Winfield Scott and General Zachary Taylor did not have a lot of trouble winning the fighting.
Very one-sided.
Yes. Now, during this fighting, which most of it goes on in present-day Mexico, Stephen Kearny is in the New Mexico territory, and John C. Fremont is in California, which is sparsely populated by Mexicans. It's mostly Native Americans. Many white settlers have moved into this land for farming or mining, and they could thought they would be able to bring their slaves in, which is one of the reasons they're supporting war. Many of the people in this region support the war. They want to be part of the United States. They want the opportunity to have their slaves or move into this region with slaves. So Kearny and Fremont actually drum up a lot of support. And while you think, well, why is that really important if all the fighting's going on down here? Well, the support they're drumming up here makes it very clear that when the United States does win this war, they're going to annex this region additionally because they already have the support in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, Veracruz is probably the biggest battle. I mean, we dominate them. And if we're thinking about how sparsely populated California was, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, these are basically Spanish missions. I think San Francisco had a population of about 2,000 or 3,000, which is like a really small town. And that was one of the major centers in California. There really was not a whole lot of settlers and people out there.
Yeah. So both of these guys will be really important. Zachary Taylor, just like William Henry Harrison and Andrew Jackson and George Washington, he will use his victories, his glory in the war to later become president. General Winfield Scott will play a large role in the Union's plans during the Civil War.
Scott's a great snake.
Yeah, so these guys will come up again, and you'll understand what we're talking about when we get there.
Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, so real quick, the war with Mexico is won. We have gotten all of this land, and now we're going to expand into this land.
So as when we win, we basically make Mexico sells all the red area on the map for about $10 million, something like that. Incredibly cheap for all this territory. That was kind of their secession for losing the war. In 1853, we purchased a little bit the Gadsden purchase. Right? This is because they wanted to build a transcontinental railroad, and they wanted that land to help build a railroad through it. Right? That ends up not happening right away, but that purchase is going to cement the borders of the present-day United States, the continental United States.
So these are our borders presently today, and you know, why did we pay for this land? Even though we dominated Mexico in the war, they were being very obstinate. They were refusing to negotiate with us. So we threw this in to sweeten the pot. Now, after we take this land, what's going to happen is now this land is open for expansion. Of course, with this will come a huge debate over whether or not this land should be free or slave, but the first debate is going to happen here in California. The 49ers, the California Gold Rush, see so many people move here in 1849 that its population expands to the point where they can skip the territorial stage and apply directly for statehood. And of course, this is going to become an issue because the people living in California, those miners there, don't have slaves, and they want to apply as a free state. And that will lead us to the next major battle in the United States of America, whether or not to admit California as a free state.
You want to think about how big the population boom was. San Francisco said it was 2,000 people living there in 1848, 1850. There were about 40.
Yeah, so
a massive explosion. Of
yeah, massive explosion. California is a huge state with a lot of shipping power on the Pacific. So it was very important to determine whether or not this would be free or slave.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to ask your teachers if you have any questions.
Thank you.